So the other thing he said is that he thinks we are living in the worst era of movies. And he said, along with the 80s and the 50s, this is the worst. But he said the 80s and 50s. So to me, that rings decades. So in
Sure.
my brain, I believe he's talking about the 2010s to now, because I think we're in 2022. I think it's too early to call that we would be in a horrible decade now because we've only been in 2 years, almost three. If he's just saying that the 2010s and on have been bad, I don't know. I mean, obviously it comes down to personal take. There's some great movies in the 80s and 50s, but
Mhm.
there's also been great movies now. And I know there's been so much director talk of, like, what do you think of MCU and everything? And let's take all those out of it. Let's take Star Wars, MCU, DC out of it. I can rattle off tons of movies that are phenomenal that I think definitely make it hard to not have that as a thought, to be honest. I'm thinking Moonlight, Parasite, La La Land, I think was fantastic. Whiplash. I'm sticking with the same directors. Birdman is phenomenal. Birdman came out in
Yeah,
what, 2010, 11? Like all those
13,
movies.
12 or 13.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Arrival, phenomenal film. Prisoners, phenomenal film. Like there's a lot of movies that have been really good that I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm gonna put Marvel, DC, and the Star Warses and the all those back into play because
No.
I think what from and this might be me putting myself into the words that he's saying, but I felt like he's talking about the consumption of movies and entertainment has become the worst it's been. That's what it's felt like to me because it does feel like people don't branch out a little more when it comes to seeing different types of movies, and they focus on only the brand driven type stuff. And we've talked about this before. It's become a very brand driven um, industry, and it's not so much talent or actor or story driven as much as it used to be. And you're right, Alex. Like obviously there are great movies that happened in the tens and in this decade, but I think over time you've kind of seen that there's been frustrations when it comes to the creative side of things and the directors where they don't feel like they're able to do that they're not able to do more story driven or talent driven type stuff these days because it feels so watered down and neutered because of the brand drivenness part of the industry. That's kind of what I'm feeling like he's talking about. I wouldn't I wouldn't really say like the 50s or the 80s were like terrible times when it comes to movies, but obviously I still have a lot more movies to watch and I didn't live in those decades, so I don't know. So I'm not really going to
Wouldn't
compare the decades, but I just felt like that's what he was more talking about. Is that because of the
wouldn't that
way you go? What were you saying?
wouldn't that make him a hypocrite then, because he came out and said that Top Gun is the best blockbuster movie we've had in a long time, because that's a property exactly to that point that you're saying. Does that not make him a hypocrite?
Well, he's
We
right.
got him.
He's right. Like it is a
I don't
great
know if
blockbuster.
it is. I don't know if it's the best. He's claimed that,
Mm,
and we're no shade to Tarantino. We love Tarantino, but um, I, I I don't think that. I don't know. I get what you're saying, and I think, but that's why I took those out of it, because I think when you take Marvel and DC and Star Wars out, take those big property movies out, there's a
mm.
lot of incredible movies that have come out that people just ignore, they don't go see. And if the
But
consumption is the problem, if the
I
consumption's the
think that's what he's
problem,
getting
go
at.
ahead.
Yeah. I think that's what he's getting at though, is because the consumption is hard to despite having so many avenues of being able to watch movies, it really has been kind of neutered and watered down to where people only focus on the franchise stuff more than it has been before, I feel like. And I think as a result of that, it's caused people to kind of forget about being able
What
to
do you mean
see and experience
before?
different.
Aren't we in the we're in there was no before. This is now, right? There was
This is
no
now and this
before,
was then.
but no, there was no before blockbuster conversation, because this you can make the argument about Jaws and everything and all those type of blockbuster movies. I mean,
Yeah.
they made a lot of Jaws, a lot of Jurassic Parks, things like that. And some of those movies made money and some didn't. We
Mhm.
see it in horror a lot. I think, yes, the consumption thing is there. We're in an era where if you want to go watch a movie, there's lots of different ways to make it happen. It's not just walking to the cinema and choosing what you're going to do and watch that day. But I don't know. I don't fully think that is what he's saying. I do think it's part of it, but I don't think the conversation is there's so much to consume. It's all the same regurgitated crap. I don't think that's true, and I don't think that's fair. Because I think if you bring Marvel and Star Wars and DC back into it, I don't think the Batman is the same regurgitated stuff. I don't think Civil War, or not Civil War, Winter Soldier is the same regurgitated type of superhero movie. They have branched out. I don't think Infinity War and Endgame are. And so I think that it's a little unfair for some of those, for the eras and the time periods, but I do get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, again, I could be putting my opinions into his words, but I feel like that's just the common theme when it comes to these directors poo-pooing Marvel movies. It's not that they're poo-pooing, blockbuster movies. They're just saying like we're getting the same type of movie from these same type of brands. Whereas, the past decades, we've seen blockbusters that feel like their own unique things. They tell their own unique stories. People went to them for those reasons. They became successful because of that. And I think nowadays he's just seeing like the landscape. He's not, or these directors don't feel like they're able to really do those types of projects anymore. It has to be a brand driven related thing, or it has to include brand related elements. I mean, we glossed over it, but Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans are making an Amazon movie to promote Amazon stuff. Like it's a weird time that we're in, and I think they're feeling that, and I think that's kind of why he's saying like maybe not all of the tens necessarily, but these past couple of years, I kind of see where him and some of the other directors are kind of coming from.
I do too, but also I guarantee you they haven't watched all of them. Watch all of those movies that you're whining about,
Sure.
then
Yeah.
formulate your opinion, because there are movies that are breaking the genre norms for blockbusters. Black Panther, you know, there are. There are movies that are really,
But
really great.
I'll say this, if we're only listing superhero movies as the blockbuster, doesn't that kind of also prove the point? Like, that's the only blockbuster. What other
Fast and
types are there?
Furious,
Okay, but we get
Top
those a dime a
Gun.
dozen now. Well, okay, that
I
was
don't
like 30 years.
understand
I'll
your
give you that
point.
one.
I don't understand your point.
I'm I'm
What are
just
you
saying, like,
saying?
it feels like they're all one and the same, and it doesn't feel like there's a blockbuster movie that feels unique. Like, I could see that he's coming from that type of mindset, and I would be I would understand. I would understand where he's coming from.
I do too. We're not at odds here, pal. We're not.
Yeah,
I
I know.
understand where he's coming from, but I do think the narrative that it's all regurgitated crap is coming from a place of either what I've watched lately and you happen to watch some crap, or you have not watched everything. Because if you're taking into
Sure.
decades, there are many movies, blockbuster or not. Arrival, I would consider a blockbuster. Dune, a blockbuster. And Dune
Mhm.
did not make a ton of money. And Dune is phenomenal. Like, there are a
Yeah.
lot of those movies I think you can find. Some of those Fast and Furious movies rock. They're
Mhm.
fun. They're awesome. Top Gun is
Sure.
fun and awesome. So I'm just saying,
That's true.
Tarantino, I don't know if this is the worst decade ever. He knows more about movies than I'll ever know, and that's okay. But there's also I see where he's coming from with you? 100%. I can see where he's coming from. Do I also see that he's old and probably hasn't watched all these movies? Yes, and that's part of the way that the world works. The old guard will then whine about what the new kids like. The new kids like these blockbusters. I've been whining about some of the crappy Cartoon Network shows for decades. They didn't make them. They don't make them like they used to. It's just
I
a
will
cycle of life.
I will say when it comes to Tarantino's words, it did surprise me a little because he's normally the guy that doesn't care what anyone likes. Like he'll talk about any movie as like the best thing he's ever seen, or not exactly in that way, but he'll see the positives in many types of movies. I mean, I remember there was a headline where he was like, "Turns out Quentin Tarantino likes Shrek." And it's like, that's awesome. Like he saw what everyone else saw with Shrek. That's great.
And I
Um,
bet you if we sat down with him, had a beer, and really talked, I bet you
oh,
he
that's
would
the
go, "Oh
dream.
no, I love it is." He'd be like, "No, I love just for an example, I don't know if it's true, but like Moonlight and Parasite and all these movies." And he's probably going
Yeah.
to sit there and tell you things he's like. And then I'd be like, "Hey, what if," and then I'd, make something up. What if I told you there was a movie about an alien who comes down, he snaps half a life away? That's called Marvel, pal. Give it a watch. You know what I mean? Like, let's just let's give things a try here. And I bet you he doesn't mean any malice or anything, but it was an interesting conversation that confused me because I didn't understand if he meant the decades or not. Because I don't know if we are in the worst decade. We very well might be. I haven't studied enough of the past, probably past the 70s. I've watched a lot of 90s, 80s, and 70s movies, but I can't speak to the 50s. The 80s was a bit of a dip. There are some banger movies in the 80s. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting. It
Always
all comes down to
diamonds.
personal taste, but we're gonna quickly